you kind of mentioned that compute was really central rather than data to that. I'm curious how, we're so used to hearing about data being the new oil, driving AI, but you mentioned compute. How should listeners maybe think about compute maybe differently from the way they were? Is there trying to frame things, because that's constantly evolving with people because the technology is moving so fast. Could you talk a little bit about how compute is relative to data and the way that you are positioning?
Yeah, one of the most important papers in the history of AI is a paper that came from OpenAI in, I think, January of 2020. And it's called it's the scaling, everyone just calls it the scaling laws paper. Scaling laws for neural networks is the title. And this is a really important insight, which is the more computing power you use to train an AI system, the more powerful the resulting AI system. Now, it does scale with data. So we're not saying data doesn't matter at all, but relatively speaking, the limiting factor tends to be computing power. And that is a very important insight, because that then shifts AI from this ephemeral thing of algorithms and data and stuff that who knows where it lives to something that is physical and practical, and it's computer chips. And in fact, huge numbers of computer chips, and increasingly the power, the electricity to run those computer chips. And that physicality of AI creates geopolitical opportunity. Now, making a computer chip, in my view, is the hardest thing we do as a species. We can talk about this process if you'd like, but you and your listeners probably know something like 97% of the advanced computer chips in the world are made in Taiwan by a company called TSMC, using incredibly advanced machines from a company in the Netherlands called ASML, as well as from companies in the United States and Japan that also make these chip-making machines. Well, I just mentioned a bunch of democracies, and it is very fortunate for democracies that, maybe as a historical accident, maybe as a credit to our innovation culture, democracies own the computing supply chain. And that created an opportunity, in our view, to say, here's this thing that's incredibly important, that's very physical, it's very hard to make. We can control this. And we can stop a nation like China from taking these computer chips and the AI systems they create and modernizing their military, repressing their population, building their surveillance state. And that was what the Biden administration did for our 4 years. And we took a lot of conversation about it in 21, and then put the action into place in 22, and then tightened it further in 23 and 24. And that was really born of a desire to make sure, especially when it comes to military competition, the United States has United States and its democratic allies and partners have an advantage that AI can give them.
I'd like to follow up on that as well. When we talk about Taiwan, I know in my own personal experience, if you get outside of kind of government-centric private sector, which is where I work for a living, and the academic and government sector like you, but you just talk to everyday people, they're aware often of competition between the West and China. And they're sort of aware of Taiwan, it seems, but they don't always understand it. I'm wondering if you were really hitting at the heart of some of the strategic concerns around that. If you could talk a little bit about like why people in AI or even outside of AI should care about that kind of geopolitical concern. A lot of people go, it's politics or something. I don't care about that. Could you talk a little bit about what does it mean if we recognizing everything that you just said in terms of policy that you're implementing, like why is I guess for somebody who's not familiar with that?
Well, the first is, let's start with the importance of computing power. And as I said, computing power is what drives AI progress. That's the scaling law. It drives a huge portion of our economy, even beyond AI. So think, for example, about the semiconductor shortage from a few years ago and how that was delaying cars and dishwashers and so much else. So I think it is fundamental. The role of computing power is fundamental in the modern economy. I think if you, for some reason, didn't have chips coming out of Taiwan, some of the analysis I've seen, publicly available analysis, has suggested this would be trillions of dollars in losses to world GDP. So there is the centrality of computing power to the modern economy. And then there's a centrality of Taiwan to making that computing power. And it is an incredibly intricate process to make semiconductors, and especially advanced AI semiconductors. And really only TSMC has mastered that process. TSMC is the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation I was mentioning before, and they're the company that has mastered this using a supply chain from the United States, Netherlands, and Japan. So again, something like 97% of the chips in the world, the advanced chips, come from Taiwan. We did try to change this in the Biden administration, and we said there's actually a strategic national security weakness. And on a bipartisan basis, the Congress passed the Chips and Science Act to bring chip making here to the United States, which has begun in Arizona. But Taiwan is still way, way ahead. So they're just of fundamental importance in the computing supply chain, and therefore in national security and the global economy.
So I appreciate that. That kind of helps frame a little bit about the whys of why Taiwan is a political concern, coming from somebody who understands both sides of the divide on that.
I should say, just for completeness, there are other reasons to care about Taiwan. I'm someone who believes very deeply in democracy, and I'm not saying we only care about Taiwan because they make really cool chips. But if you are just a pure realpolitik person, this is one reason. The chip production is one reason to care about Taiwan, in addition to the other more moral ones.